Good morning and welcome to City Hall. We'll start this morning with our invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilman Skip Kelly will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, but first, Pastor Jerry Wells of Western Hills Church will lead us in the invocation. Would everyone please stand?
Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, the Lord of heaven and earth, we come to you this morning and we thank you, Lord, that you are the God that holds all things together and our lives are in your hands. This city is in your hands. And Lord, I just come on behalf of these, your civil representatives, and ask, Lord, that you would grant them the wisdom to know, Lord, their own civil jurisdictions, and Lord, give them wisdom to protect the rights of the citizens of this city and just to discern, Lord, how the civil laws should be enforced for the sake of the general populace. Grant them your divine protection, Lord, not only for them, but also for their own families. Help them, Lord, with wisdom as they make decisions for their own personal moral life, and then as they make decisions for their family. Lord, we just pray, Lord, I don't know these individuals, but I know that every one of us has difficulties and challenges. And I pray for your divine intervention that will manifest your love in a significant way in each one of the personal issues and problems that the people of this room are facing. Thank you, Lord, for your goodness and your love for us that you've manifested to us through the death of your Son, Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call the council meeting to order and begin with item 3. These are items from the office of the mayor and a series of appointments. Do I have a motion? Second. Any comments or questions on item 3? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. We're on to item 4. This is the Journal of Council Proceedings. Item A is to receive the Journal of Council Proceedings for February 2nd, and item B is to approve the Journal of Council Proceedings for both January 19th and January 26th. All right, we have a motion and a second. Comments or questions or adjustments to the council proceedings? All right, vote on the journal. Passed unanimously. Item 5 is a request for uncontested continuances.
Mayor, I've just got a couple this morning on page 12. Under item 8D1, page 12, 8D1, item A, 4701 Diana Avenue. We ask that that be stricken. The owner has removed. Item H, 1936 Southwest 10th Street. We ask that that be stricken. The owner has removed. And item K, 2443 Southwest 40th Street. We ask that that be stricken. We will rework that for additional violations.
All right. Any other requests for uncontested continuances? Move on to the recess of the council meeting. Convene as the Oklahoma City Municipal Facilities Authority. There are 4 items. Any comments or questions on the MFA? All right. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Adjourn OCMFA, convene as the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority. There are 2 items. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the PPA. And we have one person who has signed up to speak. Mandy Griffin. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine.
My name is Mandy Griffin. I am a citizen of the Oklahoma City Ward 5, and I exercise my right to vote in the MAPS 3. First of all, I'd like to thank the mayor and the city council for the opportunity to speak with you this morning on the topic of MAPS 3 project, and more exclusively the closing of the State Fair Speedway. The State Fair Speedway is a historical, integral part of Oklahoma City. The impact of the closing of the Speedway has far-reaching implications to its economy. The Speedway annually has 36,000 in attendance to its events on Friday nights alone. These fans are from Oklahoma City area and the surrounding communities of central Oklahoma. The Speedway has hosted regional and national level touring racing series such as World of Outlaws, American Sprint Car Series, TNT Sprints on Dirt, American Motorcycle Series, AMA, and United States Modified Touring Series. These racing groups have brought in out-of-state fans and revenue to the Oklahoma City economy. This aspect cannot be overlooked. This aspect of the Speedway is never seen except for the local cash registers of local businesses. The Speedway receives sponsorship dollars from companies such as Lucas Oil Products, O'Reilly Auto Parts, Smiley's Racing Accessories, Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, Hoosier Tire and Rubber Company, City of Bethany, just to name a few. These sponsorship dollars and their associated companies provide a means for a fan base to increase each and every year. The loss of revenue by these companies is in excess of $1.5 million combined to the local community. Secondly, the businesses that support the Speedway in terms of race operation and drivers cannot be understated. Local gas stations, hotel, motels, convenience stores, auto parts retailers, banks, racing, specific companies, restaurants, etc. will be impacted in a measurable way. The dollar amount will impact their operation, and if the goal of the MAPS 3 was to improve quality of life within Oklahoma City, it also stated that $60 million would be made available for the upkeep and maintenance of public use facilities within the state fairgrounds. The grandstands are used by general public from the months of March through August each year and at different times through the year. Thus, the MAPS 3 allocated funds should be used for its upkeep. Thirdly, race teams and race owners have already purchased their cars and then were told after the fact in December of 2009. They were told closing of the Speedway was imminent. This is extremely unfair and not in keeping with the core values and fabric of Oklahoma City. Several local electrical, contracting, and construction firms have personally contacted me regarding making the necessary repairs to the grandstands if need be. The fan base of the historic racetrack goes beyond the Oklahoma City area. This track has seen some of the great racing stars of today and the past, including Tony Stewart, Casey Kane, Sammy Swindell, Steve Kinzer, Lloyd Ruby, has graced the red dirt at State Fair Speedway. Many historical races have been held there, including a NASCAR Grand National race. This history should be embraced and not erased. Finally, the passion of the race fans of State Fair Speedway far exceeds any rational thought. These are gritty, hard-working, and dedicated Oklahomans. They want their piece of the pie. They want, as do I, the opportunity to cultivate the memories with our family and friends for years to come. I would personally like to offer my sincerest apologies to the Oklahoma City and the members of the State Fair Board if there have been any bad feelings or misdeeds from the State Fair Speedway. All we desire is an opportunity to maintain an outstanding and historic racing facility. We believe in preserving our rich dirt track racing heritage. And I thank you for your time.
Mandy, but before you go, I just want to, I agree with almost everything you said. And know that I started working on this project in 2001 and just been unable to resolve the future of the grandstands. We, as council members, hear repeatedly from people in the racing community, but also the community that lives around the fairgrounds track, and there are conflicting views about whether or not that's the best site for the racing community going forward. We would love to work with some sort of private developer, and I have proactively tried to secure a private developer who would allow us to have a racing facility for a 21st century going forward at some location other than the state fairgrounds. MAPS did not directly affect the fairgrounds decision. The timing, I agree, is perhaps coincidence and unfortunate. But if the idea of trying to find the enemy and looking up here is unfair. The people up here want racing to continue. We understand the economic impact, and most importantly, we understand the passion of the people who on Friday nights have gone out there for years and years and years, because I've been one of them. But what you're looking at is a failure to come up with a solution, but not any vindictiveness or any strategic move on our part to harm the racing community in any way. And I'm hoping that in the near future being next few years, we can come up with a better solution going forward that will address the passions and the needs of the racing community, but also address those who live around the fairgrounds who, at this stage of their lives, would like to see racing continue somewhere else.
We are asking that you postpone this vote and give us the chance to speak with you and give you our ideas, because we are smart people and we have come up with solutions to fix the electrical. You did say that it was closing because of the electrical. We have solutions for you. All we need is to be heard, and we are the citizens, and we have the right to be heard. So we're asking if you can give us that chance and postpone this vote. That would be fair.
My suggestion would be for you to speak to people who actually operate the state fair with the state fair board and Tim O'Toole out at the state fairgrounds. They're the ones that actually operate the facility, and they would be the appropriate vehicle for you to talk with if you have solutions that might help identify the short term.
Well, maybe you could postpone the vote and get that meeting for us. Help us get that meeting, because we have tried.
You know, I don't think the timing has been rushed. We've been working on this, as I said, for 8 years. And so this is, I don't know when you got engaged, but this process has been going on a long, long time.
Mayor, I have a couple things. Number one, Mandy, I appreciate you coming down, and I would be more than willing to help you get that meeting set up, do everything I can to make that happen. Reading through this, and City Manager, if you can correct me if I make a mistake, in the third paragraph it says, the bottom line says, which will serve the grandstand and other fairgrounds facilities. So does this vote today, if we vote yes for this remodel, does it in any way negatively impact the possibility of a remodel of the grandstands?
What it does is there's electrical infrastructure out at the fairgrounds that's very old, back from the 50s, and it needs to be replaced. This project will replace a portion of that infrastructure, and it does not accommodate the re-energizing of the grandstands facility. To do that is another $400,000. It is not included in this project.
Okay, it says, the last line, it says base bid work includes demolition and removal of existing overhead, 15,000-volt electrical lines and related equipment currently serving the existing grandstand, and installation of new underground electrical service, a new concrete encased underground 15,600-amp three-phase duct bank, which will serve the grandstand and other fairgrounds facility. Is that correct or no?
Tim, can you help me on that, Tim O'Toole or Dennis? I don't believe that it serves the grandstand. It will be that the grandstand will be reconnected. That was an alternate bid. It's an additional $400,000.
That's correct. The alternate bid was $400,000 to reconnect the service from the primary power line back to the grandstand, and the racing promoter said he was not willing to bear that expense for one season of racing. I would like to comment on one thing.
So paragraph 3 is incorrect.
No, it's correct. It could be, I believe it's correct.
Well, if my reading of the English language serves me correctly, it is not correct, because that's not what it says.
Well, the duct bank will serve it. It's got to be reconnected, though. There was an alternate bid, and the alternate bid was not taken because the cost to spend the money for $400,000 for 1 year seemed to be a viable thing to do.
Okay, well, the problem I have is that it says tabulation of bids. We have 3 bids that are on the same sheet as this right here that says which will serve the grandstand and other fairgrounds facilities. I mean, it's either correct or it's not.
Well, it's a matter of semantics. I say it will serve it, but it has to be reconnected. If you have to have primary power, you have to have some power to step down from to connect back to.
Okay,
so in the event this power needed to be reconnected, and I think you really need to look at it, reconnected to that area, it has to be tied into the primary power service.
What I'm getting at is that if this is approved today, does it basically kill the use of the grandstand facility, or would $400,000 worth of work allow the grandstand to be continued in operation?
The grandstand has already been, the power has been turned off in the grandstand based upon, and Kenny, you can help me here if I'm saying something I'm not supposed to say. We spent a week and a half in court about 3 weeks ago, both the City of Oklahoma City and State Fair, Inc. based upon a lawsuit brought by these same people and the promoter. And the judge ruled in our favor and granted the temporary injunction and said there was an imminent safety condition. And as soon as that was done, we went out that evening and disconnected the power. And we are now taking the appropriate steps to correct that safety condition.
Okay.
And so,
but the problem is that you can reconnect the power if the electrical is brought up to code. You can reconnect the power and operate the State Fair Speedway, correct?
at a cost of a minimum of $400,000.
Okay. All right.
For the first phase.
Additional cost.
Okay.
No, for the first phase, there are electrical issues out there, but that's just the catalyst event.
Right.
There are also structural issues out there, and there are ADA issues out there that have been identified to the tune of
$4.5, $5 million.
Okay.
Who knows?
Well, the State Fair was just given $60 million by the taxpayers of Oklahoma City.
Correct.
So there's money there to do this. What I'm trying to get at is these people have an issue that is close to their heart, and they need to know that if this vote today kills any possibility of that State Fair Speedway operating or not. And we set up here week after week, month after month, talking about economic impact. We do all kinds of stuff for economic impact. And we're just getting ready to kill, in a recession, we're getting ready to kill a huge economic driver that happens. And I understand there's people around there that live around there. But those people that live around there have been living around there with that speedway for years and years. Most of them probably not original. They probably moved in after the speedway was already there. So I just think that I think that all of this together seems to me that the Fair Board is trying to push to close the grandstand when there is a huge group of people out there that have said, give us an opportunity to raise money. They had a fundraising event, I think, last weekend or the weekend before, something like that, trying to raise money, trying to organize to get this done. It's just like everything else we talk about up here. If you get people involved, we will come up with solutions. But it seems to me that somebody's saying, you know what, we don't want to hear you anymore. And I don't see what the problem is in giving them 90 days or 108 or 120 days to come up with something formal to present to the council to give us an opportunity to see if there's a possibility of that thing remaining operational. Second of all, where does the money come from? Where's the money for the contract coming from?
This money comes out of the hotel motel tax renovation dollars.
The dedicated funding source that the fairgrounds receives.
That's correct.
On top of the $60 million that the taxpayers of Oklahoma City just gave the fair.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the last thing is, you have two bids that are within 2.5% of each other, and then you have a third bid that is 50% below the other two. To me, that looks weird. Something doesn't look right with that, and I don't know why. Oh, okay, well, engineers estimate $600,000. Was it our engineers? Okay, well, I think they're smart. You have an electrical contractor that came in almost right at that 2.5% below what the engineer's estimate was. You have somebody else that came in 50% below that. I mean, is there no cap on change orders? I mean, that to me looks weird.
Yes, there is a cap on change orders.
Okay, so they came in 50% below the other bidder.
Lieber and Shalver are both very qualified electrical contractors. I have no doubt that either one of those can successfully complete the work. They've done a lot of work for the city, both of them have, and it is a spread. But I don't see any problem in that contract award.
Okay. Well, going back to the facility itself, it seems like that we're talking about years upon years upon years of quote unquote improvements in Oklahoma City, and I don't see what the hurry is on. I mean, if these people want to try to put something together, I have no problem at all in giving them some time to work on it. And Mayor, I know you probably spent years on this, but what's the hurry? I mean, we got years ahead of us of redevelopment of Corder Shore, of the fairgrounds. I mean, to me, it seems like why get in a hurry? Let's continue to try to work on it and see if we can come up with a solution, as opposed to killing this today.
Mayor?
Yeah, Pete, I think wanted to talk, and then Gary.
Mayor, I agree with most of what you had to say about what's happened, but I think the net result is, I've talked to a lot of people that live in my area that that the racing is a huge part of their life. I mean, it's a family thing for them. It's a big thing for them. I'm just concerned that we've kind of taken a path that is directed at getting rid of the racing facility as opposed to looking for a real solution to keeping the racing facility alive there. I know we've offered them other options, but I'm concerned that those options really didn't come up in time for them to make a real decision about it. I don't know how long those options have been on the table, but not very long, I don't think. And the result is they're faced with this is it. I mean, they're faced with kind of an ultimatum, and I'm troubled by that. I'm not a racing fan myself, although I know how big racing is in South Oklahoma City. I know what it's meant to South Oklahoma City. I couldn't wait to get old enough and have enough money to build my own hot rod, and I've got one in my garage that is kind of an indication of that kind of culture that I grew up in, and lots of people, and not only in South Oklahoma City, but all over the metropolitan area and all over the state, come to the Speedway to race. And I don't believe we've treated them very well. I recognize there is a force that wants them out of there. That doesn't matter what they do. That force wants them out of off the state fairgrounds. And I think if that's, when you're trying to do something, one of the things you do is you try to find a way to make the other side of the argument at least partially satisfied. And I really don't think we've done very well in trying to satisfy what the needs of the racing community is. We're going to be satisfied, or those of us that want the track gone, they're going to be happy. They're going to be happy. But those of us that would like to see, are concerned about people being treated fairly and there being an equal choice of some kind, I think can be distressed about the way this thing's been handled. And Tim, don't take this personal. I say anytime I'm getting on somebody, because you and I are friends, and I don't mean this. I don't think you've done anything personally that I have a qualm about. Nothing, zero. I just think that the passion that these people have for what they do, and it's so important to them, and it's not that unimportant. I mean, to the city itself. And I just feel like we have not really made the kind of effort we ought to have made to try to make a balance of this. The conversation about Page, I going to Page and making that work. If that had been on the table since 2001, I think then you'd have a fair conversation. But that didn't get on the table until recently.
Can I speak, or you want me to wait?
Let's let Gary talk, and then you...
Okay.
Well, I think we've lost sight of some long-term issues that have been discussed. It's not the first time they've been discussed around this horseshoe. The track, the fairgrounds grandstand has been slated to be demolished for years. It has been known by people for years that grandstand was going to go away. The promoter has known it for years. That's why he had a contract ending in what would have been one more year. What has caused us to shorten that by a year is that we have some safety violations out there with the electrical service that people didn't believe were as serious as they were, so they took it to court. And the judge ruled, yes, they are serious. Public safety overrules any of the emotions of the racing industry out there. So they did get an injunction on this. But you got to understand, even if you found $400,000 to hook the grandstand back up, where are you going to find the millions of dollars to revamp the grandstand to make it ADA compliant, which we're under a federal court order to do? The court has either said you've got a certain date to make it ADA compliant and remodel it, or you've got to shut it down, one or the other. And it has been known and decided long ago that it wasn't worth the money, put the money into the grandstand to revamp it, to be compliant with them. So
the emotions of the people being shorted one season, which is all you're talking about, the promoter has known for, am I incorrect in that, Tim?
Oh, that's correct.
The promoter has known for a long time that he had an ending date for racing in Oklahoma City at the fairgrounds. The only thing that he shorted, and these people have shorted, is 1 year. And that has been caused by the electrical issues that were found, and basically we were told they're unsafe to continue to operate. And that's why we're at the point we are today. So, and I'm a racing fan. I started going, my parents have pictures of me in a bassinet at Taft Stadium when the midgets were racing. And I grew up working on stock cars throughout my whole life, at not only Taft Stadium, but out at the fairgrounds. So it is a viable community, and it is a viable part of Oklahoma City. But they have known for a long time that it wasn't going to be long-term at the fairgrounds. The promoter decided, we had a meeting, personally had a meeting with some of the racing enthusiasts, and when we explained what the promoter had known for years, they claimed they were in the dark. They had never been told any of that. And is that our fault? I don't think so. The promoters had a responsibility to let the racing enthusiasts know what was happening out there long term. So while I understand the passion and I understand the concern they've got, and I understand their willingness to try to find a way to get the electricity hookup to give them one more season, is that really the best thing to do at the fairgrounds and for the citizens? I just don't think it is. This is something that has been discussed for a long time, has been in works for a long time, but the emotions of the last minute, I think, are what's causing us to come up and say, whoa, what happened here? Why don't we think about this again? Well, it's been discussed for a long time, so I'm hesitant to
Yes, Your Honor, I'll be brief. I appreciate the council's comments. This council has authorized 2 reports, one in 2005, the other in 2007, and the mayor, I concur with his comments. It has been known for a long time that the grandstand is not, dirt track racing by itself is not an economic viable event. It needs other supporting racing. Both consultants' reports have said that. We had all of the racing promoters, people involved back in 2005. We met in the building. The report was issued. I believe the city issued an RFP for a track. No one responded. We've had people come to town at the mayor's request. I've met with people. The local promoter has known this. I've had a conversation with him every year when the contract about the ADA issues, about all these issues. That's what caused the 2007 report to include such an extensive review of what the potential issues are, because we had to have accurate numbers, so under our obligations to tell the city what we felt the numbers were to comply with the lawsuit. People have been informed of this. I told the promoter in July, as soon as I saw this in writing about the electrical deficiencies, this was it. It was all she wrote. And he said, and the judge confirmed this. The judge from the bench made a comment in the closing arguments that if there's any culpability and notice, our contract is with Edwards Racing. Our contract is not with the individual people. How that was handled between that community, I don't have that responsibility. But I know what the responsibilities have been for many years. And for anyone to suggest that the timing of this is inappropriate or has not been well in advance and known for anyone to know is just inaccurate and wrong. I have given dozens of speeches in civic clubs for the last 5 years, and every single time the question has been asked, what is the future of the grandstand? My answer has been, its days are numbered. It is not, will not remain at State Fair Park in long term. MAPS 3 was never about the grandstand. Whether MAPS passed or failed, we would be on the same course that we're on today with the grandstand. Those processes were already in motion. The appropriate people had been notified, and we were working through the appropriate process with the city of Oklahoma City to make the necessary repairs to make sure that we were doing what we were supposed to do for public safety and to ensure the electrical integrity of the entire electrical system for the fairgrounds. Now, if you want to talk about economic impact, talk about the entire fairgrounds and what goes on. And this is an integral part of that integrity of the entire fairgrounds, of the entire electrical system. And it needs to be done, and it needs to be done now. And the judge has affirmed that, and every expert that has looked at this for the last 6 months has said that.
Any other comments from council? Yes, Skip. Then Meg.
Mr. O'Toole, I appreciate your comments. The one thing that continues to puzzle me, and I've heard, I think this is the second time we've had representatives from the racing community to come speak, but I find it kind of unusual that on both of those presentations from the concerned citizens of the racing community, that the promoter himself or a representative from the promoter's organization has not come before this council to present an alternative in reference to what his goals were, what information he knew, and how did he act on it in reference to those individuals who support the racing community. The other one is that I don't think there's nobody here that could be more passionate about projects in the city as it relates to what you like, as it relates to cultural, as it relates to history. But at the same time, when those issues many times are brought forward, it's always the one question: who's going to pay for it, and what revenue generating base does it develop for the citizens, not just for the city, but for the citizens of Oklahoma City. And not one time out of these presentations have I seen a revenue breakdown of money that has been generated in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years, from the promoter or from those individuals who have come before the council to speak on behalf of this. And so it puzzles me to sit here and realize that we have some people that, obviously, you love the game, but the love don't pay the bills. And all I'm asking is that if we can't show the economics of this, and yes, Brian, I understand you say the $60 million, but, let's not mislead our citizens, because we didn't just give $60 million to the fairgrounds. We know what that process was, and that money hasn't been collected. So it's not like we just wrote a check and said, here's $60 million to the fairgrounds, go out here and rebuild the grandstand, when in fact that wasn't part of the equation from the beginning. So I don't like this misleading our citizens as it relates to what we do and what the process has been. And, when we look at this issue as representatives of this city, when we defer to the judiciary and the district court, those representatives had every opportunity to present their legal arguments to a district judge, and that was done. And to come back now after the judge ruled against you, and to come to us now and ask us to do something to sidetrack that, when it's already a matter of public record, that there are safety issues that is dangerous to everyone that is there. I just think it's disingenuous to the system. It's a disrespect to our judiciary, and they all had an opportunity. Both sides had an opportunity to present their arguments, to present their briefs. And when you have your day in court, that's the best you can ask for. So I just don't have any other, empathy or sympathy for this, because I just don't see what has been presented to us, anything that's been presented to us to give an economic justification to do anything different. the amount of money that it would take to comply with the ADA in reference to that, it's almost like you would have to just tear the whole grandstand down and start from new. And if it doesn't generate the income that's going to justify that, then why are we even debating the issue?
Meg?
Well, hold on a second, because...
No, Brian. Meg, and then Pete, and I'll let you speak again if you'd like.
Thank you, Mayor. I just think it's appropriate probably for me to weigh in here as the Fairgrounds is in Ward 6. And please understand that even though I'm a transplant to Oklahoma City, this race park out at the Fairgrounds is incredibly important to my family. My husband grew up on Linwood, 19th and Linwood, and went to sleep Friday and Saturdays listening to the sound of the racetrack. This is an issue that is not going to make one set of people happy no matter what we do. The racetrack either stays or the racetrack goes away, and it's a very complicated situation. But you talk a lot about the history of the Fairgrounds and what's happened out there. We also had a baseball team out there for many years, and we had a stadium in 89er Stadium. That stadium came down, and we've replaced baseball history in Oklahoma City with the AT&T ballpark in Bricktown. And the sport continues to thrive. I really believe that there is a place for racing in Oklahoma City. We obviously have passionate fans, and we have people that care about this. I don't believe Fair Park is today the right place for that to be, and I would encourage us, I think Skip referenced the point very well, $5 million of investment for ADA improvements does not pay back on the fan base that we have. It doesn't make any economic sense, and if it did, we would already have been approached by a private developer to do that. So I appreciate you coming down. I appreciate the passion and your commitment, but I think the city needs to look at moving on and find you a better location.
Thank you. Pete?
Well, it's obvious this is not going to have a happy ending. There are interests that are in such conflict with each other that this is not going to have a happy ending. The concerns about the condition of the grandstand reminds me of the condition of this building. This building would be on a list to be condemned had it not been maintained over the years, had the wiring had not been redone, had ADA compliance not been met. I mean, we didn't do that for the grandstand. There was a decision made long before any of us were sitting around here that grandstand was coming down. And the reason it's coming down is because we chose not to maintain it. It's not coming down for any reason like, I mean, you can say ADA, but ADA's been around for a long time. ADA requirements could have been met 20 years ago or 10 years ago when they didn't cost $400,000 to meet. Wiring requirements could have been met incrementally as time went on. We could have done that. We chose not to do that. We can't go back and unring the bell, and it doesn't help a lot to beat ourselves up or anybody up because it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So it's obvious to me the grandstand's coming down. But I think it's a sad commentary on the way we do business. I think the ballpark is a perfect example of how you should do it. We didn't tear the ballpark down at the fairgrounds and then wait to see where we're going to have a ballpark. We built a ballpark and then tore it down afterward. We accommodated that. You can certainly make a lot of arguments where the AAA baseball brings what it brings to the city in light of what it costs the city. Certainly, that really makes the analogy pretty glaring, I think. If you look at what the ballpark costs and what revenue it actually generates, maybe that's a good example of how not to do it. If that's what we're talking, if that's what it's all about. I think it's about more than that. I think it's about a quality of life thing. I think it's about a diversity of qualities. Different people like different strokes for different folks. And I think this is an example of how we should not have done it. Now, I don't mean that the mayor's efforts, and I was involved in some of that. Some of that was still going on when I was reelected to the council in 2005. But I will tell you this, that the racing facility that was proposed that was to go in southeast Oklahoma City, the only way it was going to operate was the city was going to have to build the whole facility, and then we're going to have to pay somebody to come in and run it. So I'm very familiar with the difficulties in making one of these things work, and that was not going to happen. I mean, the city did not have the money to spend millions of dollars building a facility and then pay somebody to run it for us or something that we weren't sure was ever going to net out. However, we didn't make that, those arguments weren't used when we built the ballpark.
Right?
Well, a couple of things. I think you can probably accuse me of a lot of things, but misleading the public is not one of them, Skip. The bottom line here is that the fairgrounds are owned by the citizens of Oklahoma City. It's not a private horse facility for the chamber, and the citizens of Oklahoma City deserve to have a facility that they can race in. You know, Meg made the point, and actually Pete beat me to it, about the baseball team. We had a replacement before we moved them. There is nothing on the docket for that. There is no replacement in the works. It's just going to be torn down. The reality is, Skip, is that we didn't write a check to the fairgrounds, but the money, if the projections hold, that the fairgrounds will receive $60 million. That $60 million is going to be used to tear down buildings that have been out there for years and replace them. So there's nothing to say that $60 million cannot be used to build a new grandstand and continue the operation of racing in Oklahoma City. This city has a history of spending hundreds of millions of dollars on things that don't have any economic return. The park, $125 million. It's going to be beautiful, but there's no direct economic return on the park. Transit, $100 million on transit. There's no economic return on transit. It's a quality of life issue, and as a matter of fact, it's an expense. It's going to cost us to do it. So when Pete brought up the idea of the racing track in southeast Oklahoma City, of the city building it and then having to pay to have it operated, it sounds a lot like the Ford Center to me. We built the Ford Center long before we had anybody that would actually occupy the Ford Center. So this council telling the Ford, the Fair Board, that it is our desire to have a new grandstand built so racing can continue is right in line with the history of the way that this city has done things in the past.
Can I speak for a minute? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll give you a final word, and you can sit down, and then we'll hear from council.
Okay. If you would just give us a chance, we could show you a revenue breakdown and a business plan and the economics of it, and we could show you other events that could bring in more money, because we do care about the city and the citizens, and we're just asking for you to give us a chance to show you what it's capable of. My family started at Taft Stadium, so you asked how long I've been in it. I've been in it forever. We're not asking for a year. We're asking for another 50. It has too much historical value. If you tried to build another track, it'd be like an erector set. It would never be the same. Look at Tulsa. That's a good example. I can't speak for Mr. Edwards or the State Fair Speedway. You said, why haven't they come to these meetings? I can't speak for them. But we are here, and there's a lot of us, and we have big numbers. And there's a group of us that have sat down, and we have a business plan waiting. We're ready to go to the table, and we're not going to be empty-handed. All we're asking is for y'all to give us that chance. As you do know, the State Fair Speedway was neglected, and there was money that was supposed to be spent and allocated to make sure the State Fair Speedway was not neglected with hotel-motel tax for years, and it was neglected. That's not our fault. And you can be forgiving of us for things that y'all have with us against us, and we can be forgiving with you. And all we're asking is if you give us the time to sit down so we can all make this right and fair.
Just to be clear, we were very clear during the hotel-motel tax election that the money would not be used to extend the life of the fairgrounds. During the map selection, we were very clear to communicate that the money would not be used to extend the life of the fairgrounds. That was very important to those passionate neighborhoods around the fairgrounds, that their tax dollars not be spent to extend the life. So I just bring that up to tell you there are conflicting opinions on this, and we have to weigh both sides of those issues. I would be glad to sit down and meet with you, though, but I do want to move on with the council meeting and want to hear from council. But thanks for coming down.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Let's see. Sam and then Larry.
Thank you, Mayor. It seems to me it's pretty obvious the direction we're going and have been going for some time with regards to closing the grandstand. And a lot of people don't like how we've gotten here. It's very obvious to me that we're here at this point. And what I'm interested in, because I haven't been part of any of the sit-downs or any of the negotiations, is that the young lady said, you build another racetrack, it's not going to be the same. I'm not a racetrack fan, but I was an 89er fan and sat in that old stadium for years and thought when it went down, no matter how beautiful the new stadium was going to be, it would never be the same. And it isn't the same. It's a whole lot better. And I want to believe that a racetrack somewhere else can be a whole lot better. But, Mayor, I think it's only fair to the people here today and the general public that we hear something about the incentives and how far the city would go. And I'm not talking about operating a racetrack. Page facility is the only facility I've heard in terms of recent negotiations. But regardless of where it might be, I think it's only fair that people hear how far we would be willing to go to find an alternative location to help another developer bring racing back to the city. What kind of incentives have been thought about? And
well, what we did was
go?
put out an RFP, and we got no respondents. And flew people in from other parts of the country to try and get them excited about opportunities here. And
will we make land available, for instance?
well, you need someone of interest before you can start negotiating. You can't negotiate with air, but frankly, this is the type of passion I would like to have seen 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and that we're not seeing it. And I think all of us thought, ultimately the fairgrounds track is going to go away, and maybe then, only in a response to the urgency, is there going to be the passion to try and get people to be able to support the future of racing in the city. We just haven't been able to generate it.
I would think that RFP might have more opportunity if we could lay out ahead of time some of the general parameters that the city would be willing to go to.
I can assure you the racing community nationwide was aware that Oklahoma City was looking to build a track. Anyone who might have had the means and experience to execute such a plan was well aware there was an opportunity here. They just chose not to pursue it. Pete?
Yeah, well, there was some response, I think, to the Draper proposal, to the Southeast proposal. It was pretty well articulated what we would do. We got one response to that, and it was city builds the whole thing at a cost of several $1 million and then pay, I don't remember what it was, but it was a huge number to a developer just to manage it for us. And it was just not. And it did not fail because the citizen, and boy, I tell you what, I had lots of meetings. It was right when I first came on the council, it was a hot topic because people out there didn't want it, the people, the surrounding community. But it didn't fail for that reason. It failed because we didn't have one proposer stand up and say they could run it at any way that made economic sense for the city. So I've been involved in it a while, but I took a very neutral stance. It was on the table by my predecessor before I got here, and so I took a very neutral stance and said, I'm just going to listen to everybody. You could hardly hear for the din of those that didn't want it at the meetings. But that's really not why it failed, because it never got to the point where we could really put it, say, well, this is what we're going to do. Because there was no response except for one company. I don't remember who they were, but it was so obtuse there was no way we could have made that work. So I do have some sympathy for what's gone on in the past. I really just lament the fact that with the history of racing that's been in Oklahoma City and what a great tradition it's been and what a family thing it's been for so many people, that we don't have, that we've come to the point where the only way that we have any hope of continuing is to kill it. That's a hard place to be, it seems to me, and we didn't. There are other things that we didn't do that way, but I'm afraid that's where we are today.
Larry?
I don't want to beat a dead horse to death, but I would like to make just a few observations, comments. A little historical perspective. The mayor and I were councilmen back in 2001. There were discussions that started then, and Tim, if you would just come up and see if I'm on the right track as I go along here. The State Fair Park commissioned a outside consultant, I believe he was from either Florida or Georgia, that came in and did a consultant's overview of what the State Fair Park should look like in the years from 2001, 2002, 2003, out into the future. And a master plan was developed.
Yes, sir. That's
And that
correct.
master plan identified, at that point, really, the fact that the State Fair racetrack, as we know it, was not on the plans for one of the key drivers of what the State Fair Park in general would look like in the generations to come. The decision was made right after that the key economic driver at State Fair Park was the equine industry. And the hotel-motel tax was very specifically, as the mayor articulated, was to improve the equine facilities at the State Fair Park to keep the economic impact that particular business had in Oklahoma City. And that has been done. The equine facilities have been redone using the hotel-motel tax as the bonding mechanism to finance that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Then the vision came up for MAPS 3, and what was not done in the hotel-motel tax was anything for our citizens and the non-equine activities that go on at State Fair Park, i.e. the Fair of the Hearts, the gun show, the boat show, those other trade shows that go out there. And the MAPS 3 initiative was very, very clear to continue the implementation of the master plan that had been originally designed way back then, that had been tweaked along the way to provide a facility out there that would be a family-oriented facility to the benefit of the citizens of Oklahoma City. And in that discussion, it was very, very clear that the continuation of racing was not a part of that equation.
Yes, sir.
And so that's where we are today. There's been a very due process, in my opinion. I have sympathy for those who want racing, but it's not a secret, and I think it's time really to move on and implement the plan that's been known by people all along to move forward. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thanks, Larry. Ready to vote? I'll take a motion. All right. Brian wants to vote on A and B separately. So why don't we take a new motion and we'll vote on item A first. Okay? All right. We have a motion and a second to be voting on the PPA. Cast your votes. And it passes 6-2. And how about a motion now on item B? Cast your votes. And it passes unanimously. We'll adjourn the OCPPA and reconvene the council meeting with the consent docket. Any individual comments or questions about items on the consent docket?
6C, resolution authorizing the open market purchase of fire apparatus repair parts and services.
Hold on just a second. I'm just getting a list right now.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. We'll start with you, though, in a second. Anybody else? All right. Looks like you were right to go ahead. You're the only one.
Sorry about that. Is this going to help get the apparatus we spoke about a couple of weeks ago back?
It's a step in that direction. There's multiple things that we're doing. There will be a report coming forth on that, but we're confident that we'll have to replace, we will be buying at least one new one. So this will allow us to buy a minimum of one and additional beyond that. And we don't know that exact number at this point in time, Councilman, but this is a step to preserve that bid and to get one, and then we'll be making decisions on how many more beyond that.
Have we made any progress on? There was a situation where, the way I understand it, I could be wrong, that we were having a hard time getting parts from a company because the company that had the rights to those was in bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
have we had any movement on that to try to resolve that kind of an issue?
First of all, there's a number of issues, and Chief Bryan can come up and explain that better than I can, but we did our annual inspections on some aerials, and with those aerials, we identified some things that had to be repaired at that point in time. And so we did our annual inspections and identified some things. American LaFrance is a long-time fire truck manufacturer who's gone into bankruptcy, and because of that, we were having some problems with some parts, and so we've been able to find some parts, and we've gone some alternate routes for parts, but it is a problem for us as we go forward. And Chief, if you want to.
Well, I promised a report on the state of our aerial apparatus, and that report's in the manager's office this morning. So that gets circulated, it kind of gives you a picture of that. The issue with the parts for American LaFrance apparatus is, again, there are some parts still available. If they're the parts that we need to repair our vehicles, then we'd have access to those and we could effect certain repairs. Again, some of the parts that we need will not be available. So we're either in the position of having those, manufactured by some other company that would have to have the rights to be able to do that or what. So that still might be a difficulty in repairing some of those apparatus. But the report that was finalized kind of gives a synopsis of where we're at with that with respect to some of them. Even if we did have the parts, we believe that the cost of repairing might be not cost efficient as far as, it'd be more cost efficient just to replace that vehicle. So it's all laid out in that report. Any specific pieces of equipment I could certainly speak to, but go ahead.
Are they closing up shop bankruptcy or restructuring bankruptcy?
They're closing up shop.
Closing up shop, okay.
Yes, sir.
And have we made any contact with them to try to work out some kind of an agreement for the equipment that we still do have, that we can basically let us have permission to go around them and actually procure those parts separately? Have we made any efforts at all in that area?
Well, it wouldn't be so much us trying to get permission. Again, if we thought there was a shop that could reverse engineer or make a proprietary part, they would actually have to get the permission from that company, American LaFrance, to be able to do that. And how difficult that would be or how feasible that would be, I couldn't say.
Could we look at that? I mean, I would hate to see a bunch of us have equipment out there that we basically cannot repair without ever having given an effort to try to...
The report lists each vehicle individually and makes a recommendation if we truly believe, either because of the cost involved or the availability of the parts, which ones we could repair and which ones we don't believe we could repair, either because the cost factor or the availability of the parts. So it lists each one in our recommendation.
I would just comment that this is not unusual. Fire apparatus manufacturers have come and gone for years, and it's not unusual for a manufacturer with proprietary parts and designs to go out of business, and there is nobody else to take care of that. And we've had apparatus over the years that have become somewhat obsolete because you can't get parts for them. So it's not unusual that this is happening here. And for us to contact American LaFrance, which is, I don't have a problem doing that, but you're going to be in a long line because American LaFrance has been around for a long time, and they've got apparatus all over the world, and especially in the United States. So it's not unusual that this is happening. Some of the stuff you can have manufactured, and some of the stuff shops can start building and so forth, but this is not an unusual situation. I would point out 6A, we're buying a brand new aerial for $724,000 for the fleet. I believe that was MAP's use tax money that probably purchased that too. But we are moving ahead with replacing those, as we come along. So,
right? Yeah, Meg.
Chief, may I just ask a really strange question, and it relates to the unit that we're buying? There's a very significant difference in the weight of the two trucks that we looked at. What would account for that?
Primarily the construction of the ladder itself. E1 uses an aluminum ladder, and whereas the other manufacturer, they put a steel ladder in their specs. So just the difference between that steel and that aluminum would account for a lot of the weight.
Okay. Thanks, Chief. We have someone who signed up to speak up. Phil Sipe.
Phil Sype, President, Oklahoma City Firefighters Association, 157 Northwest 6th. I just want to express my gratitude to council. I appreciate the aggressive move on your part to address this ladder truck need. It's obviously a very important issue to all the firefighters in terms of their feeling about being in a safe rig and about our opportunity and ability to deliver, good public safety to the citizens that they deserve to have. So I appreciate the effort on council's part to address this. In my discussions with the fire chief yesterday, we have an understanding that there may be an opportunity to purchase a couple of other trucks rather quickly that we can take delivery on. So again, hopefully that can be done. But I just wanted to let you know that, speak on behalf of the firefighters, that we appreciate the mayor and the council and city manager addressing this issue rather aggressively and replacing those rigs in a timely manner. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Are we ready to vote the consent docket? All right, we have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. We're on to the concurrence docket. Okay, we have a motion and a second on these 9 items. Any comments or questions? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. We're on to item 8. These are items requiring a separate vote. We start with a couple of zoning cases. The first is in Ward 1. The address is 8800 North Council Road. It's currently a plan unit development, and it would become a simplified plan unit development. Gary?
Has anybody signed up to protest this?
No.
Anybody in the audience want to talk about this, one way or the other? Got all the stuff on the TE been taken care of. Move the item.
All right, we have a motion and a second on item 8A1. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8A2 is a zoning case in Ward 7. The address is 12101 North I-35 Service Road. It's currently AA Agricultural District, and it would become a simplified plan unit development. Skip?
I haven't received any objections to this, so therefore I would make a motion to move it.
All right, any comments or questions from anyone on this item? All right, let's cast your votes. Passed unanimously. We're on to item 8B. We got 3 closings here to deal with. First is item 8B1. This is in Ward 7, Northwest 11th, between Broadway and the railroad. Skip, you have any problems with this one? All right, you want to make a motion? Second. All right, cast your votes on 8B1. Passed unanimously. Item 8B2 is in Ward 6, and it closes a portion of Fred Jones Avenue.
I believe this passed without any protest at the Planning Commission, and hearing nobody in the audience. Anybody here to speak to this? Hearing no one, I'd ask to move approval, please.
Second. All right, we're voting on item 8B2. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. And item 8B3 is back in Ward 7. The address is, it's part of Northeast 115th Street between North Air Depot Road.
Is there anyone to speak in reference to this one? I do have some questions, if staff could. Is there anyone to speak against this? I just wanted to, is for or against?
I'm the applicant. I'm for.
You're the
My name's Stephen Yak. I live at 11601 North Air Depot.
I would just like to know, what was the driving issue? Is it because of the soil erosion, or in closing this?
That's part of it. Multiple issues. This is half of a roadbed. The other 30-foot easement was never granted to the city. It's a single-lane road. It's eroded to the point where you can't travel up and down the road. Have a lot of teenagers parking up there, drinking beer, throwing trash, contractors dumping debris, and it's right in front of my house. The police can't get up and down it. The fire department can't get up and down it. Oakdale school bus can't use the road. I'm just simply asking that it be closed and the easement vacated.
Well, I'm a little familiar with it. I'm kind of surprised that they're using it as a beer drinking.
Among other things.
Oh, really?
I've picked up a lot of trash on that little stretch of road.
That was basically, I think it was, I drove out there, and I understand that the erosion that has occurred, which is similar to some of the other areas in that geographical vicinity, but I just wanted to make sure it's not going to be a major impact in reference to safety for any of the residents, and so that's not the case. Is that right, staff?
That's correct. We looked at it, and we didn't, excuse me, we didn't anticipate any need for that because that subdivision to the south has an interior road that accesses all the lots that back up to it. We were comfortable that it wasn't necessary.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Talking without the mic, huh? Well, thank you for coming down, and thank you for your concern for that area. I'd like to move this.
All right, cast your votes on item 8B3. Passed unanimously. Item 8C is an item from the Traffic Commission. It's in Ward 3, and no parking anytime sign, Larry?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Has anybody signed up to speak on this one? I've heard no complaints. The Traffic Commission recommended its approval. Unless the council has any questions, I move for approval.
All right, cast your votes on item 8C. Passed unanimously. Item 8D is a public hearing regarding dilapidated structures. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under 8D? Has anyone signed up? No. All right, looks like we're good to go. How about a motion on 8D? Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8E is a public hearing regarding unsecured structures. Has anyone signed up to speak? All right, no one has signed up to speak. How about a motion? Cast your votes on item 8E. Passed unanimously. Item 8F is a series of revocable permits. The first is from SMG to hold the Strong and Healthy Oklahoma Health Fair, largely at the Cox Convention Center. How about a motion on this item? Is there anyone here that's representing this event here today? All right, if we get a second, we'll just vote. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. And item 8F2 comes to us from the Oklahoma City Thunder, and this is to hold Thunder Alley as part of the NBA's games on March 26th, April 9th, and April 14th.
Move it.
All right.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any comments or questions on 8F2? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8G is the continued planning process for Core to Shore. We have one person that has signed up to speak.
We have a presentation this morning that might be helpful to start us out with. We
Okay.
have Kathy O'Connor, Leslie Badger, and Russell Klaus is here to talk a little bit about the project, and Kathy will kick it off.
Okay. The item that is presented to you today is a resolution to declare the area that has been studied as a part of the Core to Shore planning study and process as blighted, and requesting the Urban Renewal Authority to prepare an urban renewal plan for the blighted area. We have a presentation this morning that kind of goes through the background and some of the history of this process that we've been through. It'll talk about what it means to declare an area blighted and how we go about doing that, and then some of what our next steps are. I wanted to, before we really get into it, is to make sure that we're all familiar with the area that we're talking about. This is the area that was studied as a part of the Core to Shore planning process that began in 2006. And it is roughly on the north boundary, the current alignment of I-40. It goes over to Dewey and then to Chartel, to Western, to the Oklahoma River, and then heads again north on the east side along what would be Central Avenue. So that's the area of the study in the plan area. It's an area that we've spent a lot of time looking at over the past several years. As I mentioned, in October 2006, we began a process where we studied the area that was to be impacted by the relocation of I-40. If you recall, the mayor convened a group of stakeholders and a steering committee that examined this process, and it took about a year to prepare the plan. In September 2007, the City Council authorized the city manager to begin negotiations for land acquisition in the Court Shore priority area, which is basically the area between the current alignment of I-40 and the new alignment of I-40 central to about Walker. In April of 2008, the City Council recommended the land use plan, the Court Shore land use plan, be adopted by the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission approved the plan as an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan in August of 2008. And then in September 2008, the City Council received and adopted this amendment to the city's comprehensive plan and authorized the land acquisition for civic uses. This is kind of the history of where we've been on land acquisition in the area. As I mentioned, the council did authorize the city manager to negotiate for land acquisition in the area, and we included in the 2007 GO bond authorization for parks money to acquire property for the Court Shores Park or Central Park. And so our first acquisition was June 30, 2008. We acquired the former U.S. Post Office facility for about $3.6 million. In April 2009, we used some authorized tax increment financing money that was authorized from TIF District Number 2 to acquire the Goodwill site. And as I think you all know, they're still in that site, and until their new facility is ready, we've given them time to occupy the facility and take care of it. In September of 2009, we purchased a small parcel, and again in November, another small parcel in the park location. I think the one in September would actually be kind of across the street from the proposed park location. So some of the process that we're talking about going through today is the process that begins authorizing the Urban Renewal Authority to use its powers for land acquisition and redevelopment of the area. So the first step in that process is the determination of blight and declaring the area blighted by the City Council and asking the Urban Renewal Authority to prepare an urban renewal plan. That urban renewal plan will then be presented to the Planning Commission after a notice period. The Planning Commission will hear and consider the plan, and then it will come back to you for consideration. Right now, the schedule that we're looking at has the urban renewal plan coming back to City Council in March of this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Batchelor, and she's going to talk about how the statutes define blight and some of the processes that are a part of this.
Thank you. As counsel to the Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority, I've been working with the Planning Department in advising them about the specific conditions, the criteria under the state statute for determining blight. In addition to some of the basic, understandable unsightliness that we immediately seize upon, the statute lists 12 criteria, including dilapidation, deterioration, unsanitary or unsafe conditions, deterioration of site or other improvements, the age or obsolescence of buildings and improvements in the area, arrested economic development. Those were the ones that were most present in the study area. In addition, the statute lists some things that are classics of tenements and the sorts of concerns that prompted urban renewal statutes across the country in the first place: overcrowding, defective or unusual conditions of title, things that make it very, very difficult for the private market acting alone to fix the problems. So under Oklahoma law, if one or more of these conditions are present in properties in an area, and so present across the area overall that it constitutes a detriment or a social liability, then the council can declare it blighted in order to enable an urban renewal plan to go forward. So the 5 criteria you see at the top of that list are the ones that were most present in the study area as a whole, and Russell Klaus will review some of the factual findings of blight on those.
We looked at a number of different sources in terms of compiling the information that we needed to be able to present this to you today. A lot of the records are within the city itself, and as Kathy had mentioned, we spent a lot of time in the Court Shore area over the last few years, so we did have a lot of that data on hand, particularly in relation to brownfields and a number of vacant properties in the area as well. Also refer to the census and the building permit data, etc. We took extensive photographic documentation in the area. As this map illustrates, we basically took photos along the majority of the streets that are in the area. It doesn't indicate that we took a photo of every property in the area, but we took a large number of photos, and we're going to go through those today as indicators of the conditions that Leslie was referring to. So the first one we're going to look at is dilapidation and deterioration. I do want to point out that a lot of these photos really cut across each of the different blight measures here, so it will meet the conditions for dilapidation and deterioration, but you will see that it will also meet the same conditions for unsanitary and unsafe conditions, age and obsolescence, and arrested economic development. A lot of these photos cover the full gamut of these particular elements of the blight statutes. So these are examples from within the area, and I'm just going to go through them relatively quickly, but you can see these buildings are very deteriorated. A lot are unoccupied. You have a lot of debris that is piled up in the area, holes in the roofs, a lot of boarded windows or broken windows, graffiti, which is an indication of people not being there, deteriorating structural conditions, roofs falling apart, patios falling down, garages falling down. It's a sort of clear definition of dilapidation and deterioration. As we were going through this, we did go down there with the city inspectors, and these conditions for dilapidation and deterioration are the same kind of things that we look at for our city ordinance. These photos are representative of the area. They are not comprehensive. These are photos of just some of the properties in the area. There are a lot of other properties that we did not include in this photographic evidence, but it's fairly clear from these photos that there are significant problems in terms of dilapidation and deterioration of property in the area. Unsanitary and unsafe conditions. The next couple of photos illustrate some potential environmental contamination problems that we saw in the area. We have broken windows in this building, which is one of the larger buildings in the area. There is meth lab activity in the area. These are photographs that the police department were able to provide of a meth lab that was in the area. Again, unsecured buildings. Here you see photos, a large number of tires stored outside. That causes significant problems, particularly during the summer, because you're going to get a lot of water accumulated in those tires, which is going to breed mosquitoes. And you also saw a large number of chemical drums there. We don't know what are in those drums, but they're unsecured. Anybody could get in there, and that would cause significant problems if if what the contents of those drums were dangerous to the community. We have, as part of the Court Shore process, identified a number of brownfields in the area. Some of those have been are included as part of our brownfields program. That will include the post office facility, which has $1 million asbestos problem, and we're dealing with other issues down there as well. So there are a large number of, and these are the only ones that we've identified at this point in time. As we go through the Court Shore process with redevelopment, it's quite likely that additional problems will be uncovered. So age and obsolescence, while the statute is not specific on this, and it could be applied to buildings, we've looked at it in terms of the paving conditions and public infrastructure in the area. So here you have a map of paving index in the area, and the red lines are representative of those roads that are in the worst condition, and you can see that those predominate in the area. the only area that is in good condition, which is Shields, which has recently been rebuilt. Conditions of the sidewalks here, you can see that the curbs are significantly deteriorated. There virtually are no sidewalks. Sidewalks, in a lot of cases, if they do exist, are severely damaged or do not lead anywhere. And this is, I think, was an old sign that had been probably broken off some time ago, but was still there as an obstruction. So holes in the road, holes in the curb deteriorating. It hasn't had investment in the infrastructure for a long period of time, and to a large degree that is because there hasn't been the economic development that's been occurring in the area to warrant that. Water and sewer line, while the primary issue here really is the age of the facility. Both the sewer and water are approximately twice the average age of our water and sewer facilities across the city. If you were to try to redevelop the area, this capacity is not going to be adequate for any kind of contemporary development. So that will all need to be replaced as part of development. So it's unlikely to support development in the area unless we go in and intervene. So the last is arrested economic development. This basically relates to vacancies, building permit, and population loss in the area. There are a large number of buildings that are vacant in the area. This is data from the county, and I think it's worth pointing out, even though the red line is, or the red bar is vacancy rate within the Quarter Shore area relative to the grey line, which is the vacancy rate across the city. There are a lot more vacancies, I think, in that area that are underrepresented in this chart because when the county records buildings as vacant, it requires that the property owner report the property vacant or that they have an inspector that goes out every 4 years and determines if the property is vacant. So we think this is an underrepresentation of the number of vacant buildings in the area. There's just an example. I think that one is north of I-40, but there are a lot of vacant buildings in the area. And again, as I said, suffering from the same other conditions as well in terms of deterioration and obsolescence. Find homeless sleeping in the area, a lot of debris, graffiti. These are all the kinds of things that are generated by building vacancies. So one thing leads to another. In terms of building permits, I think this graphic is fairly illustrative of the problem in the area. The chart, the bars on the left, the red bars are the Quarter Shore area. Those are demolition permits. That's the percentage of total permits that were demolition. So you can see that it's a much higher percentage of permits were applied for demolition within the Quarter Shore area relative to the rest of the city. And then if you go to the other side of the chart, you find that permits for new construction are significantly less than the rest of the city. So it's quite the reverse of what you would want if you're trying to accomplish economic development in the area. We looked at the population statistics, and we focused on these two particular census tracts. The other ones don't have anybody living in them, so we focused on these two. And as you can see from this chart, where the city has grown in the decade from 1990 to 2000 by nearly 14%, you had almost the same loss of population within the study area. So again, the trend is negative in terms of where this particular area is going. So we believe that the documentation that we've presented today provides a very clear evidence in support of the Blight Declaration. We believe that there's more than sufficient evidence of these particular elements of the state statutes regarding blight, dilapidation, deterioration, the unsanitary and unsafe conditions, age and obsolescence of the infrastructure in the area, and arrested economic development. And on that basis, we would look for your support in declaring the area blighted and requesting the Urban Renewal Authority to develop an urban renewal plan for redevelopment of the area.
Okay.
Questions?
Thanks, Russell. Any questions for Russell? We have one person who signed up to speak. Yeah. Well, do you have questions for Russell? Okay. All right. Well, why don't we hear the other person speak, and then Russell, don't go away, because it sounds like we're going to have some questions or comments for you. Lewis Morgan. Good morning,
My name
Lewis.
is Lewis Morgan.
We will need your name and address for the record, please.
Okay. I've been down there for 70 years. I was born and raised on 4th Street at 4th and Hudson. I run a business that is basically 101 years old this year. And if you go with this concept, when MAPS 3 was proposed and the Development Department came to all of us and held your meetings, and you all guaranteed us that our property would not be taken under domain. They told us, and they put it in public at the meetings, that everything outside of the park area and your museum would not be taken under domain. If you go in, and thank God none of my buildings was on that site. I try to keep my property upright, and there's a lot of landowners that's down there that if you start taking this property for public development, a lot of us is not going to, I'll have to be closed. I'll have to close my business because you all won't pay me the money that will take me to relocate my business. Like Goodwill Industry. I remember when they used my telephone to build that building. That building cost them $3 million. You paid them $2,300,000. The building that they moved into was sold to them for $3 million. They took a $700,000 loss. Was that fair? No. I agree. You all are trying to bring the statute of Oklahoma City up, bring in more tourists and everything, and I applaud you for that. I don't have a problem with that. But to take all this land just because you have the money now that we voted, you all told us that we would have to work with the developers and collect our money from them. Now, if you guys come in and take all this land and pay us what you guys think it's worth, and put me out of business, I'm a federal test facility, and if I go out of business, fire departments are not going to get they're going to have a hard time getting their cylinders tested. Oxygen companies are going to have to go out of state to get their cylinders tested. And there's other companies down there, too. What about people down there that build transmission? They're in that same area. That's going to give you the right. If you decide that you don't want them there, that's going to give you the right to take them. I don't think that's fair. And we was assured that this was not going to happen. Only the things for the park and what the Oklahoma City was going to do with MAPS money was to be appropriated for that. Now to come in here and tell us that, well, we're going to blight your property and take you and give you what we think's worth, or what we think it's worth, I think that's going to hurt everybody down there that owns land. Now, I agree. A lot of those buildings need to be tore down. I'm not disagreeing with that. A lot of those photographs that he showed up there, those buildings need to be tore down. I'm not disagreeing with that. But just because, tell them to tear it down and sell their land to the developers. But to go in there and take the land and then Oklahoma City resell the land for progress, I think you're doing the people that own that land an injustice. Thank you.
Thanks for coming down. Kathy, you want to
Let me
reflect
take
on the process?
a few minutes
and then we'll hear from the
to
council.
clarify what the process is here. First of all, this process is related to the Core-to-Shore planning process and the processes that we've been looking at over the past 4 or 5 years for the area impacted by the relocation of I-40. When we presented the plan to you in 2008, one of the things that we talked about was that this is a very long-term plan, first of all. It could take 30 to 50 years to implement everything that's in the Core-to-Shore plan. As Russell mentioned, it covers 692 acres. I mean, it's a very large land area. The plan also had an implementation chapter in it, and the chapter talked about 3 different ways that the city could approach the implementation of the plan, and it recommended that we use a directed development approach, where the city would make investments in public facilities in the area, and we may select some sites for private redevelopment that help protect the public investment and make the most of it. The park is probably the best example of that you might want to buy the property on either side of the park, like where the Goodwill site is, to help protect the development of that park and make sure that it feels safe to people, that it has more activity, that it has mixed uses along it, maybe retail and shopping and restaurants and housing. So the plan included all of those things from when it was adopted in 2008. The other thing that I think we need to be very, very clear about is that this process does not mean that we are going to acquire all of the land in the Court Shore area through eminent domain or through urban renewal. We are not planning to do that. It's not possible to do that. There isn't enough public money to be able to do that. So that's the other thing that we need to be very clear about, that we plan a very directed approach for the parcels that might be acquired for private redevelopment. And the third thing we need to be very clear about is that MAPS 3 money will be used for the MAPS 3 projects. We'll use MAPS 3 money to acquire the park. If the convention center location is determined to be in this area, we will use MAPS 3 money to buy the site for the convention center. But we will not use MAPS 3 money for sites that could be used for private redevelopment. It's not going to happen. So we have to be very, very clear about that the MAPS 3 money will be used for the MAPS 3 projects. If there are sites that are acquired for private redevelopment through the Urban Renewal Authority, we will use tax increment financing funds, funds of the Urban Renewal Authority. They have program income and other sources of revenue. Now, we'll look at those sources for the private reinvestment piece. So we just need to be very, very clear about that from the beginning. I don't know what Mr. Morgan was told during the public meeting process or anything. I mean, we have met with some of the property owners in the area and have been talking with them since the council authorized negotiations to purchase property. You know, we've talked with many of them about trying to buy their property. So, but the council authorized the use of eminent domain for public purposes in 2008. So that has been an action that you've taken and has been on the books for a couple of years now. So just to kind of clarify things and remind you of where we've been.
Okay. We've got Russell here and Kathy here if council has any questions or comments before we vote. Yeah, Sam?
Mayor, can I ask Russell to put up a slide, please? The one that photo locations. And I think these comments go much in line with where Kathy O'Connor is suggesting the process is going. What I want to point to, and these comments have to do with the sensitivity as we move through this process with respect to what residential integrity may still exist within this area that we do want to protect. I'm a lot more familiar with this area and its gradual deterioration over the last 30, 40 years than I am with the grandstand at the fairgrounds, because in my former life in the nonprofit world, I officed across the street from Little Flower Church, Catholic Church, at Wesley Center. And at the corner, this southwest rectangle, could you highlight this area, Russell? In the very southwest corner? Yes. At the northeast corner of that point, approximately in there, is the Little Flower Catholic Church. I think we're all aware the building itself is on the Historical Preservation Register. Across the street, a building removed, is the Latino Community Development Center, the former Riverside School that some 12, 15 years ago was entirely renovated up to city codes. Two very strong structures in that area. But I point out this little area right here where Russell has the arrow. For years and years and years, 70, 80 years, it has been more so than the residential area across the street, across Walker to the east. A very intact, and it had been fairly highly owner-occupied residential area that were a lot of families at the Little Flower Catholic Church. As I drove through there yesterday, just to remind myself of how it used to be, there have been some properties, some residents taken down. But with the powers that we give urban renewal and with the lessons we learned, I hope we learned in John F. Kennedy and the Harrison Walnut urban renewal days, the concern about wholesale demolition, particularly of residential properties. I just want us to be very, very sensitive to some areas, and this may well be one that we look at in a way that just doesn't stand, we just don't stand apart from it for the next 10, 15 years by other actions that allow it to deteriorate. But if we take a closer look at it in inventory, to see how perhaps in this process, this urban renewal process, it may perhaps be an area, a small, intact residential area worthy of protecting and preserving, and see how we can build to it. We're going to need some of those areas within this 692 acres for some of this early start housing, lower cost housing. And there are still some fairly stable residential properties in there that have withstood the tornadoes and the storms of years past. And I just want us to be extremely sensitive as we look at residential deterioration to areas specifically like that we could look at perhaps a policy that is more towards protection and preservation rather than just allowing it to decline as the rest of the area has, and then just in time, it's going to fall on its own weight. I think there are ways, sensitive ways, that we can, without a whole lot of money, if it really truly is worthy, and I think it is, of preserving and protecting, to look at those policies that will help protect that as we move forward. Thank you.
And that is one of the things that's included in the Coeur d'Alene plan is the preservation of certain key landmarks like Little Flower Church and building upon the community that's still there. One of the things that I kind of alluded to is that this is intended to be a phased process. And when we bring the urban renewal plan back to you, it is our intention to have a land acquisition plan that is the first phase. This is going to be a very long-term process, and the plan may be amended from time to time in the future to move to the next step, so to speak, in acquisition and redevelopment. But, I mean, we definitely recognize that there are some resources in the area that are worth preserving, and again, that's addressed in the Coeur d'Alene plan, and we'll carry that forward.
Will this first phase not only identify the early stage of acquisition, but perhaps some of the areas worthy of protection?
We can look at that. I mean, the first phase is to identify an acquisition area, and I will tell you that is mostly north of the new I-40 alignment. So,
but most of the residential area that you're talking about, Councilman, is not within any sort of immediate time frame for redevelopment. I think that's nothing's going to happen there for quite some period of time. But as Kathy had alluded to, we do recognize that there are structures and smaller areas within the whole study area that have merit. The whole Hubcap Alley section there on South Robinson, there are a number of buildings there that we think could actually be incorporated into new development and add to their value. So We would like to see as much preserved as we can. We just haven't got to that part.
And I understand that this would be far down the road, but if we just put it off and forget it or disregard it by saying that's too many years down the road to worry about, I would like to have some attention, some sensitivity to this early on, if it's after closer look,
right.
If it's really worth the preservation protection.
I don't think it would take long to do that, so we can do that.
Okay. Brian, then Skip, then Meg.
Kathy, I think what Mr. Morgan was alluding to was that the businesses that are down there are not going to recoup the cost of what it's going to take to reestablish their businesses. We're not going to pay them. We're going to pay them less than what they probably could originally got for the property, would be my guess. But you can't just buy a piece of property and then open up a business the next day. There's transition costs. There's all these other incidental costs it takes to move and reestablish a business somewhere that a lot of small businesses cannot absorb that, and they will close. They will go away.
And one of the things I'll say is that the city typically, when it acquires property for a public purpose, does not pay relocation expenses. I'd like Leslie to talk a little bit about urban renewal's policies and practices for relocation, and I know we're looking at updating those policies for this plan, because their rules and guidelines are a little bit different than what the city does. But we don't pay, the city of Oklahoma City does not pay relocation expenses. We pay fair market value, and on the Goodwill facility, that was a negotiated sale. They agreed to our appraisal, which was $2.3 million, and thought that they were getting a very good price for that facility. So that, I mean, I don't want anybody to think that that was something that they thought they got a bad deal, because I think they thought they got a very good deal. Or we wouldn't have been able to buy the building from them. They would have refused to sell it to us. So anyway, I'm going to let Leslie talk a little bit about relocation.
Okay, because I do have a couple other questions as well.
That's an important issue, and obviously a concern anytime land is acquired by the public. One of the main reasons to adopt an urban renewal plan for the city to help carry out improvement of this area is so that we have a fair and consistent method of offering relocation benefits to landowners. The way the Urban Renewal Authority typically works is that we use a land acquisition services firm, and so I anticipate that when we come back, if council passes the resolution today, when the urban renewal plan is presented for your consideration, one of the elements of that is finding that a feasible and reasonable, fair manner of relocation and acquisition is laid out. And what that will consist of, currently we have a staff task force working to put that together for you, is principles drawn from the federal regulations, so that when someone's property is being sought, that the relocation specialist goes through a whole process of communicating to them not only an offer to purchase the property, but what relocation benefits are available to them. And business owners have choices among various benefits packages that include choices between your moving expenses, whatever the actual and fair value of those might be, or a set price that's negotiated and agreed upon to reestablish the business elsewhere. The relocation specialist will help identify suitable sites for that business. I mean, some of these businesses may have particular zoning challenges because it may be difficult to find a site where that's an allowable use. Part of what the relocation specialist will do is go out and identify alternative sites, just the way they would do with a homeowner to find an alternative home that's safe and decent housing. Present those as options so that the landowner has choices not only about what they're willing to negotiate on the price of the property, but as you point out, there are other expenses associated with buying property that, in fairness, need to be covered. And part of the relocation plan that's presented to you will include a description of the principles and guidelines for offering those sorts of benefits. And even though that's just an urban renewal policy in practice, one of the staff considerations in looking at the redevelopment of this area is that there are both these public pieces like the park and then these smaller, potentially privately redeveloped areas along the edges. But landowners across the street from each other ought to be treated equally, and we didn't want to get in a situation where acquisition by one public entity was handled differently than by the other. So what we would anticipate bringing back to you is a policy that for this area, the city and the Urban Renewal Authority would both offer relocation benefits, just the way urban renewal usually does.
The people that, when you talked about, relocation expenses and things, it kind of reminded me of the Indians that were, offered to relocate. The owners of these properties that are forced to relocate, do they have first right of refusal on developing their own property? If urban renewal says that piece of property should be a condo, if that person that owns that property can develop a condo, do they get first opportunity to develop their own property, or does urban renewal say, no, we're going to take your property from you, we'll pay you what we say that it's worth, and you can get in the process like everybody else?
All property that urban renewal offers up for redevelopment is through a public competitive process. It's not, strictly speaking, like a bidding process where it's an objective, here's the dollar value. It is more like a request for qualifications, for proposals, where the overall objectives of the proposal are measured against the objectives for the redevelopment site itself. So a landowner can come in, but they do come in as just another prospective developer. But I would point out that in that negotiation for the property itself, the landowner does not have to simply take what's offered. I mean, we have a very elaborate system to protect landowners. If that value does not seem fair, they go to court, and 3 neutral commissioners are appointed to value the property. If that value is still found to be unacceptable, you try the value of the property. If the public entity loses on the value, if they didn't offer a high enough price, all the expenses of litigating on the part of the landowner are paid by the public entity.
Well, I'm well aware of how urban renewal works. The problem is that we're supposed to have private property rights in this country, and although all this sounds wonderful, I also know how that if somebody has a piece of property and they can redevelop on their own, once it's declared blighted, it's over. They lose virtually all their rights to develop their property.
Actually, if I could just clarify that identifying the area as a whole as blighted and appropriate for redevelopment does not mean that every single property in the area is blighted, just that overall, in terms of drawing sensible boundaries for eliminating the presence of blight, you look at sensibly drawn boundaries there. So it does not mean, first of all, that every single property in the area is blighted. Secondly, only those areas that are identified for acquisition in a map that will come back to council, and I expect those will be very narrowly drawn. I mean, this is a huge, huge area, and it will be a very small fraction of it that's identified as a priority for acquisition. And only those areas identified on that map and approved by this council can be acquired under this process. So I didn't want to leave the misimpression that the whole 692-acre, it will be a very, very small area for acquisition to help, generate the kinds of private redevelopment that will benefit the area as a whole, that will give the private landowner a reason to invest in his own property. If everyone on your street has a, abandoned and dilapidated building, there's very little reason to invest the kind of resources needed to bring your property up to code. So I think by targeting acquisition very narrowly, we will meet the statutory requirements of supporting private enterprise to the maximum extent possible and give people a reason to invest in their own property again.
So you think that if an area is declared blighted, that their property could possibly be taken from them, people are going to reinvest in their property?
Well, I think when there are public investments made in infrastructure, in improvements like the park, If people see activity there, it'll be similar to what we've experienced in other parts of the city, where a new public median, a new streetscape really does prompt private investment.
Okay. One last question, and I'll be done. Can you tell me how the cottonseed mill and pull apart fit the definition of blight and why they're included in the area? You're talking about two profitable businesses that have been there for years, and I just don't. I was looking at all the criteria for blight, and I don't see where they meet the criteria.
Let me address the boundaries themselves, because they do go all the way to the east past the mill. Part of what we sought to achieve here is to mesh these boundaries with the existing urban renewal plans. On the east, you pick up the Bricktown plan, which is the MAP sports entertainment parking support plan for the Bricktown Entertainment Center. To the north, it's the Central Business District plan. So that boundary over there was to meet up with the MAPs, the Bricktown, essentially the urban renewal plan for that area, and enable activities to take place on the river all the way up. Do you want to say anything about the specific properties?
A number of people have referred to those properties as eyesores or blighted. I mean, it's in the eye of the beholder in terms of determining what that is. Relative to the long-term economic development of the city, that's a matter of opinion as to whether it is. We just wanted to clarify the boundaries here. And as Leslie had indicated, there's no obligation on our part to go out and acquire those properties. In fact, a large part of this area, a large part of the intent of the Quarter Shore plan was to encourage private redevelopment in the area by investing in the public infrastructure. So we really believe that at some point in time that a private developer, and it may well be the Cotton Co-op itself, who elects to redevelop that area.
But the problem is what she just got through saying, that was my point, is the co-op will have to bid against itself to redevelop their property, because once it's declared blighted, if they want that to redevelop, they have to get in the process just like everybody else does.
That would only be if the public acquired their property. It may well be that with enough investment in the area, any landowner there, let's take the mill as an example, may well decide that they would be well served to change the use of their property into what then becomes a higher and better use in light of the uses in the surrounding area. It doesn't necessarily involve, taking their land or forcing them to sell it. Individual owners, as we've seen in Bricktown, may decide that an old warehouse can suddenly be put to a better use. Just the way we have the climbing facility in the silos nearby. I mean, there's all kinds of redevelopment potential in this area as a whole. And for this area to succeed over the long run will depend on private owners deciding that it is worth investing in their properties. The public can't do this alone. All we can do is pick a few strategic parts to help incentivize the development around it. And that's what I anticipate the urban renewal coming back to this body would look like, anchored by the park and the boulevard with a few select sites nearby to help get things going down there. But in the end, it will be up to private property owners to make or break the area.
The question wasn't answered, though, how those two pieces of property fit the definition of blight.
Yeah, it's the area as a whole. I do not think that we've inserted specific evidence in the blight study as to the mill being blighted. One aspect of blight is when there are incompatible uses for an area. So, over the long run, those incompatible uses may create a problem. But I don't think any of the photos that we included in the blight study today are of the mill. I can't speak to the pull-apart facility.
Well, and I can address the cotton mill because I think that's a great example. I've met with cotton mill owners, the general manager down there, half a dozen times, and they are looking at, on their own, relocation. They do not believe that the long term that's the best location for them. They believe that there is, I think, redevelopment of that area to an alternate use that they would probably do on their own. It's probably the highest and best use of that property. I don't think they would be opposed for the right price of us coming in and taking it out. I don't think it's necessarily our plans to do that. I don't think we have probably the resources to go in and do that. It's a significant piece of property, and we require significant resources to make that happen.
May I correct one thing I said? Kathy's reminding me that one thing we did identify in the study and the evidence that's before council today are potential brownfields issues with both those sites. So one thing that could be made available potentially is assistance to clean up those brownfields if there's environmental contamination. There are often good federal resources to help with that.
Okay. How about Skip and then Meg? Okay, Meg and then Skip.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Ward 6 is having a busy day today. 2 points I just thought maybe we could clarify. And Kathy, one for you is, would you mind just getting on the record from the city's perspective how it is we acquire property so that our citizens...
How it is that we acquire property?
I mean, how the process works in terms of getting appraisals. And
if this area is identified as an urban renewal plan area and we adopt a land acquisition plan as a part of that, we will, urban renewal will get the services of a land acquisition agent, and we will, through hopefully negotiated sales as much as possible, where we get appraisals of what the fair market value is, acquire property. If that's not possible, then we will go through the process of eminent domain like we do on property, other public property.
But by statute, the city can only pay appraised value, essentially.
Yes, the city can only pay fair market value, and that's determined either by an appraisal or once you get into the condemnation process through, as you know, Leslie mentioned, commissioners or a jury trial.
Okay, thank you very much. And Russell, a question for the planning department, and this relates to Skip's commentary about protection of areas. I believe I recall that we have undertaken or are undertaking a study of all of the structures in that area that are 50 years or older, or is there not something that we're...
We are as part of the third phase of doing the historical survey of downtown, we will be looking at the Quarter Shore area.
Great. So we will identify...
We will be identifying everything down there that has historical value.
Great. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Skip?
And I would like to just comment on the fact that the process of eminent domain as it relates to the city of Oklahoma City and our policy, from everything that I have studied and researched as far as litigation in other cases, the city of Oklahoma City has a very, very high standard in reference to protecting the rights of citizens and their property rights under the process of eminent domain, and I'm sure our legal department could validate that to anyone, including our citizens. But the one concern that I have, and I mentioned this last week, and I find it kind of interesting that we have this presentation today, because I would like for this to be something, to be an ongoing picture showing of how this process, in my opinion, is really flawed. How do we get to a point that the pictures that I wish that we would put back up at some later date for citizens to really see that what falls in the category of blight? How can we correct this issue in the future that we do not allow the health concerns, the brownfields, the total deterioration of a city's look, the green spaces that are never going to be unless we start being proactive in reference to real residential code enforcement issues in our zoning codes. You know, when you look at these pictures and you look at the complaints from the Action Center, and they give the numbers over the last 5 years of the complaints that's been made in some of these areas, and in 5 years it indicate a total of 1,385 citizen complaints received for the area. 64 for dilapidated structures, 38 for exterior property maintenance. Why are some of these buildings still standing in the first place? It's just, what do we have as far as our code, our ordinances, our judiciary, that we will allow this. And I don't care how many years it is. Mr. Morgan speaks very eloquently about the fact that this man has a true business, and at the same time, we will allow this type of conditions to continue and continue. And I mentioned this last week, that it seems like that sometimes we cherry pick certain areas. If not before the court ashore, would we even be talking about this area being a blighted area? And this is the problem I have. I support the process. I want to see us go forth. But at the same time, can we stop this? We should be a better city in reference to the beautification of our city, to not ever have this condition in any part of our city.
Brian has a follow-up, and then Pete, and then we'll hopefully vote.
This is an easy one. Did notices have to go out to everybody in the area?
Notices don't go out relative to this declaration of blight today. Notices go out before consideration of the urban renewal plan in March. It will be a published notice, and it will be posted on signs in the area.
So somebody's property is going to be declared blighted, and they don't get a notice that there's going to be a hearing to do so?
There's not an individual declaration of blight as to individual properties. It's the area as a whole. The notice is published in accordance with law in a paper of general circulation, and signs are posted in the area.
Pete?
I have a question about the designation of blight. If we vote today to declare this blighted, does anyone have experience with what a lender or would do? How would they treat an area that was designated blighted if a person wanted to come in and borrow money against their property and fix it back up? So that individual property would not be blighted.
My experience, the North Downtown area, for example, was the last area that we included in the urban renewal plan area, preceded by a declaration of blight. And there's been a lot of development in that area subsequent to both those events. And I don't believe that the bankers ever look at the declaration of blight as an issue.
So we think that's not a bad thing. Okay.
I don't believe so.
Okay. Secondly, I wanted to speak in support of what Sam said earlier about preservation. These pictures that we have obviously represent very, very poorly maintained, deteriorated, blighted properties. But I submit that I could take a camera and go into that same area and give you another set of pictures that would show buildings that are structurally, that have a high degree of structural integrity, that have a high degree of historical significance, that still maintain their uses. And so an argument could be made just as well on the other side that there's plenty to preserve here. And when I think about this being we heard potentially a 50-year project, the idea that we declare the whole area blighted when we may not even get there in 50 years, there's just something about that I find somewhat troubling. I recognize the success that we had really with it in the area in the near north. That's a very, very successful project. But I can certainly understand the gentleman who has a business down there being concerned about his area being declared blighted, and the word itself has connotations to it that are not easy to digest if that's been your home and your business for 100+ years. And although he doesn't look that old, but perhaps he's got some secret that I don't have about how to live to be 101. But I almost wish that, well, not almost, I wish that these two proposals worked together, that the declaration of blight was here at the same time that the specific designation of properties was here. Because I think it'd be easier for a citizen to understand. We ask people to trust us, and contrary to what they
they said about us in Maps 3, I think we are people that can be trusted, but it would be nice to have some evidence to show them that we will do what we say. And I think if we had both plans here at the same time, it would be much simpler to do that. The other thing, I want to second what Skip says completely. There is no reason in this city for an area to look as bad as this does when we already have tools that could be used. This is the glaring flaw in a complaint-based system. Because if nobody cares enough, there are not enough people live there anymore or operate businesses there anymore to generate the complaints, the whole area goes down the tube. And you should not be able to drive around an area the size of this one anywhere in Oklahoma City and find these kind of disturbing pictures. These pictures are a blight, and they're a blight on our ability to really do what we should be doing. And that I acknowledge that is the flaw in a complaint-driven system. But it really, as graphically as I've ever seen it, it points out what's wrong with the system where we wait until somebody calls and complains, where we don't have once in a while somebody just driving down the street and saying, my gosh, look at that place. The one I'm looking at right now with the tires, I mean, man alive, somebody should have turned that in a long time ago. I wish I'd driven by there, I'd have turned it in. I mean, that's...
Pete, ask the Action Line how many calls they get from me on a regular basis.
But, I just think it's... I certainly can understand where this guy's coming from. He's looking at the whole area being declared blight. Brian's comment about the cottonseed mill compress thing there. It is such a... It is such a kind of trustless kind of a declaration that we're doing here today that I can certainly understand why a citizen might have some concern about that. And that's, I want you to bring that other thing back as soon as you can with designations. And also the idea that this study with regard to the buildings that are either structurally have structural integrity or they are have historical significance needs to be brought back, because there are a number of buildings, and there are some buildings in this picture that should be saved. There are several of them that we ought to save. And I don't want to make the same mistake, and I tend to believe it's a mistake, of doing what we did in the 60s, where we just bulldozed Oklahoma City. And, actually the place where when we bulldozed Oklahoma City, I'm old enough to remember this, probably not anybody else does, but when we bulldozed Oklahoma City and loaded into trucks, the area where we hauled Oklahoma City to is in this blighted area. It's over there just east of the compress where the cotton is. You look over there and you see rubble over there and broken bricks. That's where they hauled all of it and cleaned the bricks right there. And that area is now in the area that we're declaring blighted again. It seems like a vicious cycle to me.
But Larry, the final word.
I don't know if it's the final word. I'm confused, Leslie, so help me. If I understood what Brian was saying, what Pete was saying, and I have this, I think it's the same concern. We're talking about declaring 692 acres blighted today. But yet Kathy was talking about coming back with a plan that's going to identify a much smaller target area. Is it necessary for us to declare the 692 acres blighted before we see the priority plan of what we're really talking about? Or can we see the priority plan, which I'm going to assume is a lot less than 692 acres?
And unfortunately, the way our statutory system works, and it's common to, I think, most states, but certainly in Oklahoma, every city has certain powers to eliminate blight. It has urban renewal powers, but it can only use those in areas that it finds where the area as a whole is blighted. And again, I would emphasize it does not mean that every single property is blighted. And in fact, the statute calls not only for redevelopment, but for conservation and rehabilitation. So in addition to private property owners just doing things of their own accord, one possible activity for the public side, for the Urban Renewal Authority, is to enter into contracts with owners of existing buildings to rehabilitate or preserve or restore those buildings. I mean, it's a sort of a variation, I would say, on our Skirvin project, in that not every single urban renewal project has to start with bulldozing what's there. I think in many different ways, we are in a new era of urban redevelopment. Just the attitude and, frankly, arrogance that we had 30 years ago, that we can clear acres and acres of property and we will magically make new things happen, has been disproved. And I think if you look at the urban renewal activities of the past decade, they have been very targeted, very specific to bring about a certain new development in a strategic area that will benefit the surrounding area. That's what's envisioned here, nothing that takes over the area as a whole. It still is important to have sensible plan boundaries because there are powers that this gives the city beyond just the acquisition of property. One very important one is that the public trust of the cities can actually assist retail development in an urban renewal area in accordance with an urban renewal plan, which is something it can't ordinarily do. There's an exception in the Public Trust Act in an urban renewal area. So there are powers like the acquisition, disposition of property, entering into contracts with existing landowners to help them rehabilitate their own property. There are things that can be done, but it's looking at the area as a strategic whole from a planning perspective, and the activities under that plan are themselves narrower, the acquisition activities, the focus on preservation of certain areas. So it's a plan as a whole, but it does not mean that there will be activity on every single parcel.
We ready to vote?
Just out of curiosity.
Yes, we're not. Skip's curious.
Do we have a list of the different businesses, commercial businesses, that exist in this whole acreage that we're identifying?
I don't know that we currently have a complete list of that. I know we have partial information, and I imagine we could put something together like that if that would be helpful.
I would just like to know how many commercial businesses exist in this whole area. We know one.
And I apologize. I actually didn't hear the answer to Larry's question. Larry's question was, do we have to declare it blighted before we can see a plan?
Yes. I suppose it could. They could follow each other immediately on an agenda. Ordinarily, since it's at council's direction that urban renewal would prepare the plan, it seemed more sensible to tell urban renewal to do that and then bring the plan back.
But if we wanted to, we could say urban renewal prepare a plan so we could see why you wanted to declare this entire area blighted.
I think there's no legal problem.
I think we're to the point where we're struggling over semantics. If what we were doing was declaring this area in need of redevelopment today, I don't think we'd be nearly as concerned as we are when we use the word blighted. Blighted has these other connotations to it that just make it very difficult to deal with from this. And when we have the public here that doesn't believe his house or his business is blighted, it's too bad that the language is blighted as opposed to in need of redevelopment. I think if we had that, we'd be much better off.
But I will say, and I hope this is the final word before we vote, that we consistently deal with large tracts of land. We have empowerment zones, we have TIF districts, and we have blighted areas. So this is not inconsistent with typical public policy and planning procedures. How about a motion?
I'm sorry, I just have to admit, I got to bring in a second horse to beat for a while. But on Skip and Pete's concerns about why haven't we dealt with these things that you see in the pictures, I would imagine staff would have loved to have been proactive in their code enforcement over the years if we had given them the people and the resources to do that. So in the years past in budgets and in the future budgets, you need to keep in mind when you cut one department and at the expense of another, what goes on when you do that kind of stuff.
Okay, how about a second? All right, everybody ready to vote? Cast your vote. And it passes by a count of 7-1.
Mayor?
Yes.
It'd certainly be helpful to me, and maybe helpful to all of council. Just the concluding remarks of Leslie Batchelor this morning. that put it, I think, in real perspective would be helpful as we go.
Yeah,
forward.
perhaps
I think
information on the website about Core to Shore could explain kind of explain to property owners what exactly steps have been taken and what they might expect next in the area, just so we can alleviate whatever concerns. We don't want people being overly concerned. Okay, we're moving on to a presentation by Craig Freeman, who's going to be dealing with the budget, and we'll note this is a public hearing. Jim?
On January 5th, well, first of all, we've obviously had declining sales tax revenues over the last several months. On January 5th, we brought together via a finance committee meeting at this Horseshoe action plan to address the financial situation for this year. Made several recommendations and said we would come back in the future with a budget amendment to facilitate putting those into effect. We also then followed that up with a full financial workshop that addressed broader items than that, but also covered this again in some level of detail. And so what we're doing today is bringing forth a budget amendment to memorialize what we presented to the council on January 5th and further covered in the financial workshop a couple of weeks ago. And so in the hopefully trying not to be redundant, we are again going to bring forth the items that address this year's budget shortfalls and how we implement our plan to address those. Craig?
We will move quickly because we have visited over a lot of this. We do have more than just the adjustments that are being made on the budget amendment for the mid-year adjustments because of the downturn in revenues. We have 4 different funds that are being amended. 2, the general fund and the internal service fund, are related to the mid-year budget adjustments. We also have an amendment on the police and fire capital equipment use tax fund. There's a little bit of fund balance that's left there, and you'll remember that this was the source that we used for the project staff to implement the projects of the police and fire capital equipment sales tax. It was the 32-month sales tax that we had back that ended in 2003. And so there's a little bit of fund balance there, and we're just trying to use that and provide a little bit of relief on the operating funds. In the stormwater drainage utility fund, we have some improvements on the Oklahoma River. One is the river maintenance facility, and the other one is some capital maintenance, and we're using fund balance to do this also, and so we'll look at that as we go along. Focusing on the general fund, again, we've talked about this quite a bit. Basically, what we're looking at is sales tax, the drop in sales tax. We're making some amendments within the budget to reduce our projections on sales tax, and then we'll make adjustments on the expenditure side. In total, we're reducing revenues in total by $25 million, and then we're using some fund balance to help offset some of the impact. This is a look at the sales tax. One interesting note, we'll have a report coming in the next probably couple of weeks. We don't have all the data yet, but we do have the February sales tax check. It was still down, but not down as significantly as what we've seen in the last several months. We did just finish 12 consecutive months of decline in sales tax. However, if you look at the last 2 months, it does look like we're seeing some improvement. We're definitely seeing some improvement. Whether or not it's a long-term trend, we don't know, but that is definitely our hope. February, for us, it was about is a decline of about 7.3% from last year. That's compared to 12% in January, almost 16% in December. So there is some improvement that's there, but we're still going to be very short on sales tax in the current year from what our original projections were.
And not shown on that graph, go back if you would a second, Jason, not shown on that graph is the use tax. And the use tax for February was actually over the use tax collections of the previous February. So it was a positive number instead of a negative number on the use tax.
And that's 2 consecutive months of increase in use tax. And so that's good news for us as well, because a lot of that represents business activity. In the mid-year cuts, we did ask all departments to propose 2% reductions. Not all the departments took the full 2%, but we did ask for 2% reductions. Some of the departments were able to reduce services and supplies, so they didn't have to cut positions. We still ended up with 37 non-uniform positions that were eliminated, and only ended up with 1 layoff as a result of that. Most of the position reductions are expected to have incremental impact on services. This shows just the departments that did eliminate staffing. This is our total 37. We had 36 positions that were eliminated out of the general fund and 1 position out of our fleet services fund.
In our mid-year adjustments, this really is looking at the strategy that was presented originally to the council. And so not all of these things that are outlined here are implemented in the budget amendment. We do have the mid-year reductions in the hiring freeze that are expected to get about $4 million in savings. We're only implementing about $3 million in this, and that part of it with the reductions from the departments. The deferring capital we're reducing by $4 million, and we're doing that in the budget. Reducing contingency by $4 million, and then our IMSA reserves by $2.3. So we're reducing expenditures by about $13.3 million. The use of MAPS 3 use tax to help preserve uniform positions was discussed as a strategy. This is not included in the budget amendment this time. We will be coming back later with a resolution for the council to establish the purpose of the MAPS 3 use tax, and then with a budget amendment to establish the fund. So that'll be at a later time. Fund balance then will have to be used to offset any impact that we're not able to address through reducing expenditures and through help from the use tax fund.
Could I ask a question right
Yes,
here?
sir.
A couple things about that, or one thing. When you're talking about reducing the fund balance, what will the reduction be? I mean, what will it bring it as a percentage of the?
Our expectation right now, what we're doing is we're adding about $12 million to using fund balance, and I'll show that here in a second, to how much fund balance we're expecting to use. Our plan right now, based on what we're seeing with our expenditures and with our revenues, is that we believe we'll use between $12 and $15 million in fund balance in this fiscal year. That'll leave us about $30 million in fund balance at the end of the fiscal year is what we're expecting.
And what will the percentage of that? What will that
percentage of the budget? It'll be a little bit. It'll be about 8%, I think, is what the.
Okay,
what the
so we'll
percentage
be
is.
pulling it down below the 10 for the first time in a long, long time.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay.
And it's an excellent point too. The current budget for the general fund is $352 million. We're reducing revenues by about $25 million. We're going to use about $12 million in fund balance, according to what we have in the plan. And again, this is for the budget purposes. And that'll leave the amended general fund budget at $338.9 million. The other funds that, yes, sir.
One other question. You talked about the number of people that are eliminated. The position, are those all positions, or is there an actual person who's been terminated as a result?
There's only one. There were 37 positions. A few of those, we did have people in the positions, and they were placed into other vacant positions. And there was only one position where there was someone in the position that we weren't able to place them in another position. So
we've eliminated one job, one person's job so far. Okay.
The other funds that I mentioned before that are being amended, we are increasing the police and fire capital equipment use tax fund. There's about $150,000 left in that fund. It was used for the project management on the police and fire capital equipment capital equipment sales tax projects for the project management office. We have a little bit of fund balance, so we're going to use that to help with some of the management and maintenance on the public safety information systems. In the stormwater drainage utility fund, we're increasing that by about $1 million. That is for some erosion control in the Oklahoma River, some dredging of the sedimentation basin, a boat dock repair, and then additional funding. We do have some funding that's already set aside, but it's additional funding for the river maintenance facility, and that'll house the boats that are used for maintenance along the river. In total, then, we have reducing the general fund budget by $13.3 million, reducing the internal service fund by $400,000, increasing the capital equipment fund by $72,000, and then the stormwater drainage utility increases by $1 million for a total change of $12.6 million decline or decrease in our budget, leaving the total budget now at $833.9 million. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Craig? All right. Run while you can, Craig. We'll take a motion on item 8H2. All right. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Item 8I, I understand we do not need executive session, so how about a motion? Okay. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8J, I understand we do not need executive session. How about a motion? Okay, cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Item 8K, I understand we do need executive session.
Yes, sir.
All right, and we'll go to executive session. And item 8L, I understand we do need executive session.
Yes, sir.
And that one is also moved to executive session. Item M is claims recommended for denial. We have... Okay. We have a couple of people that have signed up to speak. Matthew Bugler.
I believe he left and told Amy that we could go ahead and act on this today.
Okay. And did you indicate this person is here today?
Yes, he is.
Okay. Kevin Chrysler. Hi.
Thank you, Zach. Good. Yes, actually, I am Sterling Chrysler. I'm Kevin's dad, although I live at 2200 Northwest 54th. I was advised that our claim would be denied because there were no issues with the contractor's equipment and that our fence came down because of the windstorm in May. I would like to submit that I work on a south-facing room and see the equipment of the contractor doing the lawns facing or on the Northwest Expressway side regularly. And on this particular time, at the end of April, I saw the fence move as the equipment's going by. There were 3 cracks, 3 of our posts. It's an 8-foot fence, 4x4 posts. 3 were cracked, and I actually had to have a helper brace one of the sections up. After the windstorm, 3 sections came down. When we called the city, they said we needed to get 3 quotes, which we did and paid for the repair, and then I guess it turned out we needed to submit more information. But I actually saw that fence shake as the equipment's going by, and of course there wouldn't be any equipment issues because it appears that their tires hit it as they swing. There's a place where they turn right where that fence is. And so I did not, of course, see it happen. I was on the other side of the fence, and so I just submit this for your all's consideration.
Kevin, what sort of city vehicle was it?
Hard to tell, but it looks like a pretty good-sized tractor.
Okay. And you believe it was a city vehicle because, or city tractor because you saw it and recognized it as a city tractor, or?
No, only a contract. I understand it's contracted services. I can also add that the guy that repaired the fence agreed that something happened, as well as the gentleman that was out. The fence fell on our gas main, and he had to come out and just repair that. And he just commented that something had obviously hit it. And the fence itself was no more than 3 years old at the time this happened.
Is this your house, or is this a business?
House.
Okay. What can you tell us about this?
The information that we received from the claimant was that they only had about a 2-month range time frame where the incident occurred, couldn't narrow it down to a date, didn't witness what happened. So this is new information to us, but we still haven't received any further narrowing of a date or anything like that.
Kevin, do you know what day it happened?
I do not have an exact date.
Okay.
And although we were not, that I'm aware of, advised that more information was requested.
Okay. I tell you, why don't we pull this item and we can review it separately and gather more information so our staff can see if there's any way that we do feel like we're liable on the issue and get you paid accordingly if we come to that conclusion.
That I would appreciate that.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay. Any?
Defer 2 weeks? 2 weeks.
2 weeks? Okay.
To the 26th.
All right. And so we need this one deferred also? Yes. Okay. How about a motion then to defer 2 of these items, one at Francis's request and one that Kevin has just brought to our attention. So this would be item, you have to hear which ones they are first. This is 8M1B and 8M1F. And it sounds like we have a motion and a second. Let's vote on the deferral of those two items. And they have, yes, B and F have been deferred for 2 weeks. And then it looks like we're good to go on the others. So how about a motion to act on the others?
Was there another one that you said that we had someone to speak on?
Yes, her attorney was here, and he left and told Ms. Harrison that we could go ahead and act on it today.
Any way? Any kind of way?
Yes.
Whatever way we chose.
That's what a lawyer said.
All right, cast your votes. And it passes unanimously.
I don't believe he had any new information to give us, though.
On the number 9, this is claims for approval. Is anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under item 9, claims for approval? All right, we have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. And those claims have been approved. And we're on to item 10. These are items from council. Gary?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to surprise everybody. I actually have a couple of things this morning. I ran into Steve Lackmeyer at the coffee shop this morning, and if you read the paper, one of the articles about the downtown improvements, the headlines of the article were a little bit misleading in what the article actually said, and Steve wanted me to pass along to staff that he's very complimentary of the plans and what's going on with the Project 180 and all of that, and I think if you read the article, it's more positive than the headlines were, so pass along to staff that it didn't, he didn't intend for the article to be as negative as the headlines were in that, Jim. The second thing is, on good news from the Convention Visitors Bureau on the sports scene, we've been awarded the 2012 meeting of the National Sports Forum. For those of you that are not familiar with that, this is a meeting that happens every year with the top executives of all of the major sports franchises. I mean, football, basketball, hockey, baseball, the whole bit. And once a year they get together and brainstorm good practices, bad practices, you know, good things that are going on, bad things, and so forth. And this is a big event that happens every year. And we have got that in 2012, which is a real coup for the CVB.
Yeah, and just kind of expanding on it, it's groups that have events, it's groups that have associations that choose their own meetings, and so I think it's great exposure for us. I'd forgotten about that, so thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, it was in Baltimore this year, I believe, and going in Louisville next year. Supposed to be in Boston in 2012, and they couldn't follow through with it, and they gave it to us. So. Great kudos to the CVB and its staff for getting that in. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple things. Another perhaps little misleading news article last week with regards to a clerk shot in a robbery on Classen, 28th and Classen. And the article went on to talk about fear spreading among the Asian district there. Yes, they're concerned about crime, and the next Asian district meeting is going to address that with probably some participation of the police department. But a concern also about just getting the wrong message about the Asian district when an article like this does. The difficulties we've had in this stretch of the Asian district in the last several years, for the most part, if not exclusively, have been at these small little convenience stores or beer and cigarette stores not operated by Asian folks, and concerned as much about the wrong impression that people get when an article like this comes out. Fear runs rampant in the Asian district. I think there's as much concern, Mayor, and city manager, about the wrong message that in not getting this darn street, Classen Boulevard, completed. And there's reasons with weather and other extraneous reasons that have complicated this, but there's too much of a message that we, the city, are leaving undone or unfinished. some work, big work, that is going to make vast improvements, already has on that stretch. But just getting the wrong message there by a lot of machinery sitting around too many days idle. So just wanted to bring that to our attention. The other thing is, and Gary politely reminded me last week about our negligence in bringing forth some status report on billboards. You know, what have we done since the enactment of the billboard ordinance 2 years ago? So I slipped a note to the city manager yesterday just asking that a status report come back to the council. It won't get us a year's look, Gary, but it will look at the first 2 years implementation since the ordinance went into effect. And we need to do that. I appreciate it.
All right. Larry?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. I don't want to be too over-exaggerate something, but I'd just like the neighborhoods that are watching. I hope that you took a look at the conditions that we studied in that blighted area, because quite frankly, if we as citizens don't take the responsibility for our own neighborhoods 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, that's your neighborhood and mine. And with that in mind, I'd just like to compliment the police chief, if you would pass along to him, that he had Sergeant Epperly come out to our neighborhood meeting this past Saturday in Windsor Hills. There were 80 citizens that were in attendance for the purpose of receiving advanced training in how to perform neighborhood patrols so that the citizens could get re-energized to be the eyes and ears of our police force in our neighborhood to combat crime. And that's the kind of proactive approach that will keep neighborhoods from going down. So again, my thanks to Chief City and to Sergeant Epperly for the excellent work that they did and for the 80 citizens that were in attendance. Thank you, Your Honor.
Pete?
Just a couple things, Mayor. If I put my mic back on. I had some good news this morning about the next phase of the 44th Street project. I understand there's hope that we're going to have a meeting as early as March 1st, so anyone that's listening, I see Commissioner Mon here, and I know it's something very dear to his heart, and so hopefully we will have a meeting March the 1st, which will be the meeting with the stakeholders, really, the people that's properties will be directly affected, and we'll get that project moving along, and hopefully that was good news for me. Second is today's election day in I-89. The school election. We've the city of Oklahoma City, the citizens of Oklahoma City have put almost $1 billion into the schools in the last few years with regard to Maps for Kids and the bond issues that have been issued in the local school districts. Almost $1 billion has been invested. It's extremely important that we send the very best folks that we can to represent the citizens, the patrons of I-89. And I urge all of you to get out and vote. I could tell you how I'd like for you to vote, but I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
Could I just, I forgot, thank you, Pete. There was also a school board election in part of Putnam City School District. I don't know if it's over in your area or not, Gary, how many, but there is at least one active race going on in the Putnam City area, so I'd like to encourage the voters out there to get out and vote.
Okay. Brian?
I just want to send a special thank you to OCPD last week, specifically the Firearms Training Center. The Youth Council was out there, and it wasn't the best of conditions. It was pretty cool, and of course, all the rain and snow that we'd had, it was pretty nasty out there, but they absolutely just bent over backwards to try to accommodate those kids and give them a great experience out there, so just my greatest appreciation to them.
Meg?
Nothing today.
All right. Skip?
Yes, a couple of things. First of all, congratulations to all those Houdat fans, including myself. I just couldn't wait for this opportunity. Those thanks. But on a serious note, last week we all were shocked with the news report of one of my former councilwoman, Ms. Willa Johnson's, with the unfortunate demise of her grandson. And I would like to say this because I know that the press immediately, there were, I think a lot of misstatements, a lot of misinformation. But when someone's life has been taken, it becomes a serious note. And I was really kind of shocked that the presentation of this and the reporting of this incident, much of it was incorrect. That tended to be more of a bad light on the deceased. And the fact of the matter is, I think that when a person loses a child or a grandchild, a loved one of any degree, that there should be some level of civility as it relates to the reporting of the loss. And so I say that with a lot of, feelings about how things get out. But Ms. Johnson deserves to be respected of a grandmother that did everything that she could do for a grandchild. And so my prayers are with her, her family. It's unfortunate that the services will not be in Oklahoma City because of the mother of the young man has also lost another family member, and her brother is on life support. So it's my understanding that the services will be Thursday at 1 o'clock in Broken Bow, Oklahoma. And so she is going through a great deal, and I ask that everyone, keep her in your prayers. And my last comment is, again, I would like to see if there's any way that we can sit down with everybody that's, in our department as it relates to this zoning and these neighborhood conditions, as we have witnessed here today, that we have some deplorable conditions that exist in this city. And I just feel like that we can do a much better job if it requires a major change. We need to do the change, because this city and the citizens and people who come to this city deserve to look at something much brighter and greater than what we have been presented here today in some blighted areas. And I have mentioned this in Ward 7. I think the conditions in a lot of parts of our city is just like what we saw here today. And so whether it's the Court Ashore or just the fact that we should be more proactive about the cleanliness of our city and the healthiness and the health issues that exist in every part of our city, we could do it. And these slum lords, they need to be held accountable, whether or not they own commercial businesses or whether or not they own these here raggedy shacks that are ripping people off every month and violating every code that they can get around. And we need to stop it. And if we start making them more accountable for going into these areas and just putting their names on deeds and renting these properties out to people and just taking money out of the community and doing nothing to invest in it, we could cure a whole lot of this overnight.
All right. We have executive session. I will bring up for anyone listening that we have we have city manager reports first. Let me make a comment first. I want to give out the pothole hotline number, because I know that with the recent bad weather we've had, we're going to have a number of traffic and safety issues if we don't get to this as soon as possible. So that number is 631-1111. So if you pass it on to your constituents who start to make the calls that I'm sure are inevitable in the next few months, we'll get to those as soon as we can. Jim?
We did have a presentation, or do have a presentation scheduled for the Myriad Gardens, but due to the time when we've got some executive sessions and how much meat we've had on the agenda already this morning, I may recommend that we really put that off for a week. Okay. Okay. All right. So I think we will put that presentation off for a week.
Anything else?
No, sir. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right. We have executive session.